Well, it's a very early good morning, everybody. It's about 1:45 in the morning here, and I've just come in from the garage. If you watched my previous video, or I think it was the one prior to that actually, about the starter motor solenoid, you'll know that there is a red wire coming from the power supply to the starter motor solenoid, and that powers the whole bike. Len's bike, my friend Len's bike, stopped working the other day because its terminal was so corroded with it being under the bike. The starter motor solenoid is right near the mudguard, and it's about 5 inches off the road. So Len's had corroded so much that the wire effectively didn't carry current anymore through the block connector, and there was no electrical power to his bike whatsoever. So I think it's good practice to check, because Len's experience, you know, he got home, he went straight home, and then turned his bike on again and it was dead, as per my previous video. So what I did tonight was to bite the bullet. It's not an easy job, it's not the most difficult job, it's a bit involved, but it can be done with a few basic tools. The entire process tonight, taking the bike to bits and getting in there, checking it and putting it back together, took me 2 hours and 15 minutes. So it's not the easiest job, but you know, 2 hours and 15 minutes, even if it takes 3 hours, it's a lot less than waiting at the side of the road for a recovery vehicle or a trailer or something, because the bike's lost all power, and it's definitely in a vulnerable position, that block connector. So it's worth spending the time to check, because Len's was so bad, and it really is in a daft spot. It's just under the bike, right next to the mudguard. You know, there's filth everywhere. So you take your tank and your side panels off, and then remove the rear wheel. So the access to get to this thing under the battery tray is from the back. It can't be done through the side panels without great difficulty, because the battery tray will not come out. It will only come out from the back of the bike. You don't need to remove the tray, but it's best approached from the rear of the bike. So get the rear wheel off, and then you'll see that there's the black plastic front bit of the mudguard, and it's held on by 5 or 6 bolts. It's also advisable, I think, to remove the chain guard, because by removing the chain guard it's a lot easier to inspect the red block terminal that lives in this rubber shroud, in Len's case full of road muck. So take the chain guard off. It's only 3 bolts, and like sort of specialist Allen bolts. So I've got a split link on my chain. I think a riveted link is not necessary on this bike. I mean, it would be on some big super bike, but on a bike like this, I've had a split link on it ever since I put the new chain on 2-3 years ago. Nothing wrong at all with it, and it makes life a lot easier. The next step is to remove the ECU. I wouldn't advise removing the block terminals from it and taking it off the bike. It's pointless. There's plenty of wire, and it has about 2 million connectors inside it, the block terminals. Sod's law says it will bend one, pull, or snap one pulling it out, or bend one putting it back. So I just unscrew the 4 inner star screws. The 4 outer ones don't do anything, they just hold the 2 halves of the casing together. So it's the 4 inner ones, and then it's advisable to remove the battery. Now when I do it, I always undo the bolt, remove the terminal, and I straight away put the bolt back in. I learned the hard way on that. You know, if you take the bolts out and put them down and then pull the battery out, you're virtually 100% guaranteed to lose the nut. And they're not normal nuts, they're not even square. There's nothing more frustrating. As you can tell, it's happened to me. So I always put the bolts back in before physically pulling the battery out, and then you don't lose them. Otherwise you faffing around trying to make a nut fit, and that it won't. So I always put the bolt back in. And this next shot shows just lifting the ECU out of the way. So I've undone the 4 inner screws, but not the 4 outer ones, and just lift it up a bit. So far then we've got the tank and the side panels off, rear wheel off, battery out, and ECU disconnect or unscrewed and pulled out of the way. The next thing to do is there are 2 bolts that hold the rear part of the mudguard on. In my case it's a stainless steel mudguard. It may be on your bike, it might be the original plastic one. So there's 2 bolts there. Now by undoing those, it enables the rear part of the mudguard to drop down. You can actually push it down, and it makes it easier to remove the black plastic one. So just take those out completely, and that will allow that mudguard to drop a bit. The battery, obviously, here's a shot of the lithium battery that I put in. There it is. Now that cylindrical thing is the tilt sensor. It's the rollover sensor, so if you drop your bike, it turns everything off, and that sits on a metal lug. That needs to be undone as well, and it's at the moment I've undone it and it's dangling down there. So that's the tip sensor. Now this next shot shows at the back of the plastic mudguard. Once you've undone all the bolts, don't just start pulling it off, because on the back of it, attached to a plastic lug, is that block connector, and that's accessible from the right hand side where the side panel. And if you look in there, you'll see there's this block terminal, and it clicks onto a lug. To get it off, you just pull it from the right hand side, pull it towards you, and it comes off the retaining lug. Otherwise, if you start pulling that plastic mudguard, you're going to pull those wires. And this next shot shows the bolts that hold the inner, or the forward part of the mudguard onto the bike. Now in my case, I replaced the bolts with stainless steel Allen bolts, and I also put anti-seize on the threads. So taking off those bolts is dead easy, for me anyway. And that, you can see all that filth there on the mudguard. Well, that just under it and behind it is where the solenoid lives and the power supply. Hence it lens being in such poor condition, I think. So having done that and taken the bolts out, you'll then find you've got this. There's your plastic front part of the mudguard. And you can see that's supposed to be the clean side, but at the bottom right there you can see road muck's got up the front of it, and that's where the starter motor solenoid is, just behind that. There's the lug in the middle of the mudguard that block terminal goes onto that I just mentioned. So having got that far, the next stage then, if you'd have to get on all, you'd have to go down flat on the floor unless you've got one looking, you've got a bike lift, and then you look forward in the gap where the wheel was, and you will see this. Now you've got a white block terminal, so both of those wires go to the solenoid. The white one is a block terminal with a little, you have to push a little tab down with something sharp. You can't do it with your finger, small screwdriver, and you can separate that connector. Above is the plastic rubbery shroud thing. Now if you look at the very top of the picture, you see a little bit of metal sticking down. Both of those cables go through a closed oblong loop. So I cut it. It's it's about the thickness of a coat hanger. I just cut it because otherwise I don't know if the blocks would even go through it. It would be a tight fit, and it's cramped under there anyway. So as you can see there on that picture, that L-shaped thing at the top, what I've done is I've cut it. I've actually cut the oblong wire thing, retainer. The bottom bit is I've bent down to show, in order to show those connectors, and I'll show what I did at the end to rectify that. So I would suggest cutting that with a pair of snips, and then it makes life a lot easier. Otherwise you've got to undo all your blocks, you've got no room, all of that because of this silly thing, which I don't even think it needs it, quite frankly, but anyway, I cut through mine. You then disconnect the block, and if you look at that white terminal block there, that's each half. You'll see there's on the bottom bit, there's like a little, on the left hand side, that's what you have to push down. It locks into that square hole on the top bit, and that's one of these waterproof connectors, so it's quite a difficult pull. You've got to push that little thing in the square there, and then pull it, but not by the wires. If you pull it by the wires, I think there's every likelihood it'll just pull the terminals out of it. So that's the white one that's goes to the solenoid. That's the negative lead, and in the back there you'll see there's a cable tie around the rubber shroud, which is wide open at the other end, and inside that is the red wire, the red block that carries power to the fuse box of the bike. So disconnect the white one, and then you've got to sort of reach into the shroud there and press on a tab on the red block terminal, and it will come apart. This picture shows, this is why I said take the chain guard off. This picture shows you can pull that up to the left hand side of the bike and pull it up and out there. You've got enough slack to do that. So as you'll see, there's a cable tie on the left of it, but there's nothing on the other end, which I think is not a good idea really. That's how all that muck gets in there. So I've separated the red block terminal. You can pull that through and inspect what's inside it. Now in my case, everything was fine, no corrosion, nothing. Plenty of duck fat, the usual, which I think in the case of this connector is a really good idea, unlike all the rest of them, because it stopped mine from corroding. So that gunge is the duck fat that's so prevalent on the bike. So having established that mine was fine, I don't know if I was disappointed or not, having gone through all that rave up just to find it was fine, but now I know it is, so it's worth doing, isn't it? You know, you think, well, I needn't have done that. Well, if I hadn't done it, I would never have known. I might have had a Len type connector and be stuck at the side of the road. So I've established that that is absolutely fine. There's no corrosion, the wires are rock solid. I think Len was possibly unlucky having got some muck in it, or maybe the angle of it or something. So when I put it back together, I put a cable tie around the neck of the rubber shroud thing. So I put a cable tie on it, but I then put a cable tie on the other end, the wide open end, and really tighten that up, because I can't see what the point is of just having a wide mouthed shroud thing over it that lets water and muck into. So what I did was to cable tie both sides, and that metal clip that I cut, it's strong enough to just bend it back up. It's absolutely capable of holding the block connector and everything. So there it is. As you can see, I've reconnected the white block connector, and you can see on the right hand side there where I've cut the metal bit. Can you see that on the right there? It looks a little bit like a haggis, I think. And there it is. Inside that is the red wire, the red block terminal, plenty of duck fat, and as you'll see on the right hand side, a tightly wrapped cable tie. So at this stage now, having established that everything's fine, I've tightened it all up, make it as watertight I think it will be watertight now. And finally push all that white cable into the little retaining lug. So there's everything now happily back. You'll see the metal that I cut there, look, but it's perfectly strong enough. It's about as thick, probably slightly thicker than a coat hanger, so I just bent it back up. It's absolutely fine. You could cable tie them on. As I say, I've done that because to get those block connectors through that little bit of wire, it's like an oblong welded on, it's just so difficult. So having cut it, I'm perfectly happy. And then it's simply the reverse then. You put it back together in the reverse of what I've done in this video. Just work your way backwards. Total job, as I say, about 2 hours and 15 minutes. It does involve, unless you've got a bike lift, you're going to be rolling about on the floor. So I've come in from the garage, I'm covered in grease, and never do your bike wearing shorts. I've got grease all over my knees, elbows, but it's worth it. At the end of the day, I now know that my bike is not going to have the problem that Len's had the other day, and I bet anything that somebody out there will probably have a really cruddy, corroded red wire block terminal that could be disaster. So worth doing. I think if you've not done a lot of biking stuff before, you know, it might take a bit longer, but it's not you don't have to be a brain surgeon to do it. So there you have it. I'm worn out and long day, but I had to get it done. So I hope that helps people. If you decide that you're going to check your wire out, I would do it. But anyway, life's all about choices, that's what they say, so it's up to you. So no doubt sane people will all be in bed asleep, and that's where I'm going now. Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to get clean first, and then I'm off and have a well-deserved kip. And I will post again soon with another little mod that I'm doing. So in the meantime, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.